I have Jewel Hohman with me for today on an episode that I promise you I have been thinking. It's taken us a little while to kind of get this coordinated, but you have been on my mind. Your work has been on my mind because I feel like I am in I'm in a place right now where my friendship life has kind of taken on a lot more importance. And so I knew you were someone that I wanted to talk about this with. Can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm so excited, so excited. Again, I'm Jewel. You nailed my last name. And I am a connection coach, so I help people enjoy themselves when they're socializing, manage like overthinking when they're done socializing, actually have fun, enjoy being themselves. And I help people create meaningful friendships because we do know there's a science to that, and often we are often, but there's a lot of like cultural barriers and things like that. But a lot of the times we are often getting in our own way of creating the meaningful connections that we want. So that's
That
what I do.
that's so interesting because I think if you would have told me, I don't know, I'm trying to take a guess at a time frame, but that probably doesn't even really matter, that that people could benefit from a friendship coach, a connection coach. I would have thought that's so weird, but that's when I was so wildly disconnected from my own body and what I wanted and my own ability to connect. I probably just wouldn't have even known where to start with that. So tell me, when you are helping people with friendship and connection, where do you start?
It depends, uh, case by case, obviously, with clients. But I will say too, your comment on, oh, it's so weird. Like, how would like, why would somebody need something like that? Unfortunately, we are in a situation where we are literally in a loneliness epidemic. Our U.S. Surgeon General announced it. And like 67% of us before the global pandemic reported being lonely, like frequently to regularly to all the time.
Oh,
So the majority of Americans are already lonely. This goes across like all age ranges. Social anxiety is becoming our new normal, especially for younger generations. So it's a situation that I think a lot of us have a lot of shame around because we're like, this should have been already figured out. What's wrong with me that I don't have this? And we also have this like idea as well that friendship or connection just happens to us or it doesn't. And so we don't really feel empowered in this area of our lives. And yet it's so important. Connection is such a fundamental need. So much so that when we are younger, if we're babies, this is kind of morbid, but I think it's really important to recognize how much of a need this really is. But when we're babies, and this happened in I always forget the year. I'm so bad with numbers, but there was this orphanage that was being run by these lovely nuns, and they were feeding these babies, giving them the proper nutrition, medicine that they needed, changing them. But they, with how busy they were and everything, they weren't holding them or spending time with them. And 90% of the babies died even though they were well fed, taken care of, and they were just not being held. So connection is so much of a fundamental need for us that we literally, if as infants, like we'll be like, oh, well, no one's out there to connect with me, look out for me. I'm not going to survive. So it's such a deep need. So when I start with clients, I think so I have like three types of clients. I have a client that, has friends and doesn't feel very connected to them, and they want to feel more connected to their people. I have most of my clients are social perfectionists and have some level of social anxiety. So I deal with that. And then I have people that, if they move across the country, they don't know how to make new friends or are just really busy and don't know how to fit friends into their lives in a sustainable way that's actually going to stick. So depending on the clients, we start at different areas, but honestly, I think I would argue for the majority of them, it is starting at that place of shame and kind of like slaying that shame about like, this is something you should have figured out or not, because it's something a lot of us are in pain about. Um, so yeah.
there's so much programming too around friendship. Like
Yeah.
you said, shame, that comes from the way that we are taught that we are supposed to have friends, or we're supposed to have a
Yep.
best friend, supposed to have close friends. And when we don't, we can feel shame about that. what are some of the biggest programming pieces that you have noticed? I mean, I have a whole list, right? But I'm interested in just what your thoughts on that. What is the programming that you run into with your clients?
Yeah, so there's a lot of like truly honestly discrimination, prejudice, and devaluation of each other because we are devalued in like our patriarchal society. So we tend to again like yeah, again there's no other way of saying it, like devaluing each other. And one thing I've really noticed with my clients is we tend to project our self perfectionism, right, of doing things right. I always say my clients are really worried about like saying the right thing at the right time in the right way so that everyone likes them. That's typically what the kind of person that I love working with. And they they tend to also project that onto their friends as well. Like, oh, my friends didn't say this at the right time. They didn't support me in the right kind of way. So I didn't feel supported.
Hmm.
So we tend to do some of that. We also over apologize and really, really worry about protecting each other's feelings. So we aren't as honest in our friendships. And actually, one thing that we know is that female friendships, although we are so much more emotionally attuned and like emotionally intimate with each other, our friendships are also much more fragile than men's relationships. And
Interesting.
I think a huge part of that is because that we aren't very honest with each other. Like if we're in a romantic relationship, we're more likely to say, hey, this bothered me. This hurt my feelings. I feel loved in this kind of way. And we are not as willing to do that in our friendships. And it's truly like asking for what you need and talking about the relationship itself is the highest form of like emotional intimacy. So many of us are afraid to do that, not doing that. And so we, just do the slow fade from each other and things like that. Or we just cut people off, label them as toxic much quicker. So
What
those
is
are a bunch of
behind?
things. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a bunch of it. The other part that I always think about, and for me, growing up in a conservative kind of religious community, my romantic relationship was supposed to be the most important
Mm.
relationship in my life. And I was supposed to kind of give that all of my best effort and my best energy and my best attention. So that's something that I bumped up into or bumped against really quickly, because here I am married to this man who I love, who I think is wonderful. And why are all of my needs not getting met here? Why is he
Hmm.
not able to, you know, be all things to me in the way that I was kind of brought up to believe between church and Disney, right? That he was going to be everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's huge. Like definitely prioritizing like our romantic relationships or in general. But I think along with that, I'm so glad you said that, is we get worthiness from a sense of right being in a romantic relationship, or we're kind of taught that means we're worthy. Like one of my favorite like comedy skits is this woman says that, oh, Taylor Tomlinson says she's like, when I got that ring on my finger, it was like almost like, oh my gosh, look at me, I'm so worthy, somebody loves me.
Yes, I was
And
chosen.
I was chosen exactly. And I think we don't necessarily, not that we can't, but we don't necessarily get that from each other as women. I think as well, I will also say is that because there are, as of right now, limited spaces for women in places of power, we tend to also view each other as competition. And so
Yes.
when a friend is like jealous of us, or when a friend gives us feedback and maybe we take it as them being critical when they're really just trying to be helpful, part of the reason why we do that as well is because it feels like such a betrayal in that way. Like, oh, there's no room up here for the both of us.
So interesting. I have a lot of clients who echo the same words that you said about being afraid to be honest, afraid to ask for what they need, afraid to essentially face a conflict. They kind of turn away from it. Um, What do you think? What do you think is behind this? What are your thoughts about the challenge that we have of being honest, saying what we want to need, saying when our feelings are hurt, saying when something either doesn't work for us or bothers us?
Yeah. I think we here's my guess. I think on some level we're aware that our friendships feel more fickle, if you will, or more fragile, and we don't want to disrupt that. That's a hunch of mine from my past experiences, to be
Mhm.
honest. However, what I do know from working with clients is that they are so afraid of the rejection because, and there really aren't very many social scripts for us in how to have a conflict with a friend. There's actually a ton for romantic relationships, but there aren't really like a ton that we really see like in like pop culture and things like that for like, oh, we have this talk and we tell each other how we feel and then, we maybe even like I read this article the other day and they were like, what happened to the kind of conflicts that women would have like in Sex in the City, like that show? Because they would like call each other out and then be like,
Yeah.
okay, I love you. And there aren't really a lot of like examples of that anymore because we have prioritized romantic relationships so much. So I think it's also like a little bit of the fear of the unknown. There's so many things I could say too, though. Like it's also, I think as women, we typically have a general distrust of each other. Unfortunately, you will not believe, oh my gosh, Sarah, it's so common. I'm constantly coaching women on their thoughts around other women.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel as emotionally safe with other women because, you know, again, like so many things. Like, I'm sure you have like not a bunch of ideas on why that is, but I'm constantly coaching women on their thoughts around other women because we view each other as drama or catty. Or again, I think that like competition, that there's not enough space for both of us to really be successful and to shine. But yeah,
I think it all has to do with this idea of like limited, like in patriarchy, it is the men who hold all of the access to power. And then when they let us in, quote unquote, by promoting us or dating us or choosing us or allowing us to compete in kind of the same realms and ways that are typically just for men. I do think that that really contributes to this idea that there is limited power and influence in the world. And if you have some, then I don't have
yeah,
some. And if there is attention given to you, then that means there's less attention in the world for me. And it's patriarchy really has to thrive on this idea of scarcity and limited power, even for men, right? It's not
hmm,
just women. But yeah, I think that has to be some of the underpinnings of this drama and
absolutely.
competition and envy. And yeah.
Absolutely. So well said. So well said. I think too, there's a little bit like taking like the good girl mentality.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of, I don't want to be seen like if I hurt your feelings is like not being nice
A
or
hundred
like,
percent.
right? Or not, yeah, like being like almost like being too sensitive and not being, again, like that like good girl mentality. I think that's part of it as well.
Always being nice, always being accommodating, always being kind.
Yeah.
And for me, this rejection piece that you talk about, um, I also just want to name, as someone who has ADHD, a lot of people with ADHD have a different relationship with rejection. It can seem very outsized and very painful because of just the way ADHD brains work. But the other thing that occurs to me is that we don't get any guidance around rejection. We don't get any guidance of like, what does it mean? How do you tolerate it? How do you work with it? And left alone, right?
Mhm.
Our human brains just say, well, rejection means I'm bad. Rejection means that there's something wrong with me. Otherwise, I would have been chosen and accepted. And so I'm curious on about your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have as well, which is why I'm so excited by the questions that you gave me. I know I said this to you before we started recording, but my brain is literally going so fast right now because I'm like, I want to talk, I want to tell Sarah about this. But uh but yeah, okay. Can you remind me of your question? Speaking of
Yeah.
going fast.
Just and there wasn't really a good question in there, more just like noticing like we don't get any help with rejection. We're just left to kind of
Yes.
navigate this very primal pain all on
Mhm.
our own. And we navigate it in so many different ways. I'm having memories of like getting cut from a sports team in high school and feel like having to just deal with that on my own, having people end friendships with me and not know like what was happening. And so I just think this centrally, I mean, we know that we're wired for connection. We know that groups help us to survive. There's something so primal about wanting to belong, and we get almost no help
Yeah.
in rejection. Just your thoughts about that.
Yes. Okay, I have two like main thoughts about that. One, we also kind of get this narrative, at least in our culture, that, oh, it shouldn't bother us. Like, we shouldn't care what people think. So, and that often adds like another layer of, oh, something's wrong with me because I care what this person thinks, or I care that I was rejected. So, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. We really don't have instruction for how to really care for us in that moment, rather than we should rather, oh, something's wrong with us, or something's wrong with us because we're upset about it.
Yes. There's like no place to go where you're just okay.
Right. And what's so interesting as well is that when I am often coaching clients, they typically normally go back to middle school as well. But like it reminds me of this pain or this relational trauma, which I, stay in my scope, but if they bring it up, they bring it up. Of when I was in middle school and I was rejected. And I think as well, that's when we are becoming really socially conscious and right, like they talk about like the spotlight effect, where you feel like everyone is like watching you around that time. But also, you really haven't had a lot of experience with rejection, so you don't know that you can feel that intense primal pain and be okay, right? And
Yeah.
so especially our brain and our bodies, they remember those rejections from like that time period. And so we also really want to avoid them because there is no instruction on really how to deal with them. So I think how we do deal with them, like anticipating some of your listeners thinking about that, is I think one, we need to recognize like, okay, and I think the best way actually I can explain this is through a story that I have. So earlier this year, I had a friend that I've had for years and years and years. Uh, she just, it doesn't matter. She wasn't acting like herself. She ended up deciding not to be friends. I genuinely just hope she's okay. And I was even debating on, this is so funny, like reaching out to her mom just to be like, hey, like, is, so and so okay? And then in the middle of me thinking about that, I was outside my like local coffee shop, I was getting ready to go in, work on some stuff, and I get this text from her mom of her mom making fun of me, and she meant to send it to my friend. And I was like, oh, okay, so they've talked. I don't need to ask if everything's okay. But that hurt, right? I felt
Yes.
rejected. That hurt. But what was so different about my past self and in that moment was I didn't make myself wrong. Like knew that that would hurt, and I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, like honey baby girl, like of course that hurts. Of course, like just really being there for myself and like feeling and processing this without going and making it mean anything else about me, just like sitting there taking care of myself, taking care of this part of me that was hurt. And after like really taking care of that part of me, because again, I didn't make it mean, oh, I shouldn't care what these people think. I, should be unbothered by this. I think we have this like notion in our culture that we just need to be unbothered. And which, by the way, most of us or a lot of us are becoming more and more avoidantly attached, which is interesting. So we're really like trying to
Yes.
put on this unbothered persona. But instead of doing that, I just cared for myself, treated myself like it was normal, I had so much compassion. I felt so connected to myself that I walked into the coffee shop, wrote the best workshop that I've ever freaking done, and it had the most attendees that I've ever freaking had. And truly, when I think about that moment now, even as I'm telling this story, because I can watch it on people's faces, because they know, like, it's on some level that rejection feels like they're like, oh,
Yeah.
but it really is such a profound, and it's just such a moment that I'm so proud of, because
Yeah.
again, I was there for myself. It didn't have to mean anything else about me. And that took a lot of practice and a lot of de-shaming and a lot of work being there for myself, knowing what that really means and looks like, in order for me to do that.
Ugh, so many things. First of all, yes, my face did the because how is that not going to hurt? And I love
Right.
that you kind of call out this unbothered. I have seen that lately, and it's almost like the idea has begun to exist out there that if I am unbothered, it means I'm somehow superior or
Mhm.
healed, or I am somehow on a higher plane. And it's interesting because when I look back at some of the friendships that I had, I can see how I constructed a lot of them so that I would not be rejected.
Yeah.
So, and part of it was pretending that things didn't bother me. Like, no, it's fine. I don't care if right. But it was this really kind of armored way of
Mhm.
moving through friendships where I didn't let them see parts of myself. I kept parts of myself hidden. I would have never admitted to being upset by them or having my feelings hurt, although the hours and hours I spent afterward ruminating about it would
Mhm.
have, told the truth. But I do think that I did that so that I would not be rejected. It's like, I'm going to keep myself back first so
Yeah.
that you can't reject that part of me. That's such a painful and just such a human thing that happens.
Right. And I think we also make it mean on some level that we are confident or are secure.
Yes.
Almost as if, oh, me, because I'll tell you what it did not mean. Like me being hurt by that message in that moment did not mean that I wasn't confident or secure in myself. It meant that I, like the fact that I was there for myself. Again, I didn't make myself wrong. And I was like, of course this hurts. Like, ouch. Like, when I really went there, I was like, I really cared about these people. And honestly, it allows me to still have care for them to
Yeah.
this. Like, as I just said before, even telling the story, like, I was genuinely concerned. You know, I think they are okay now. But regardless, like it allowed me carry for myself, being there for myself in that way, not judging myself for it. Like in my opinion, that's what secure is. Not that I was hurt or feeling or cared about these people and their thoughts about me in that moment. And I think so many of us are like, well, if I was confident, then it wouldn't bother me. It's like
Yes.
that's not it.
That's so true. I talk about how this like armoring up to me was like my fake security, my fake secure
Mm,
attachment, but it
so
was
good.
really just like hiding and guarding and holding, rather than having the ability to tolerate openness and vulnerability and being hurt. And I have had, my mom made this comment about me one time, and I actually thought it was so true because I was talking to her about wishing I had more friends. And she said, Sarah, you've always been the type of person to have 4 quarters instead of 100 pennies,
Mm,
meaning like 4 very few but high value friendships rather than lots of, not less valuable, but just quantity wise.
mhm.
But one of the things that I realize is that all of the friendships that have lasted the longest for me have been because of a willingness to let me be me, even though I would not have named it at the time. And I've had lots of friendships come and go. When you talk with women in particular about creating friendships, what are the biggest obstacles that they face?
A lot of it actually is most of us aren't lonely because we don't know enough people. Most of us are lonely because we don't have the deep bonds that we are craving, right? And we don't know. Like you could Google all day long how to make friends and it'll tell you how to And I mean, I know that I Googled a lot in the past, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it'll tell you to join groups, it'll tell you to go out and meet new people. But most of us already know enough people. We just don't know how to make that bond deeper, take that bond deeper. When I say deeper too, I don't just mean on like a vulnerability scale, like really like the bond. And so there's that. However, as well, what you just described of like the 100 pennies, if you will, is like our sense of community. Those are different from our deep, meaningful friendships. I recognized actually at the beginning of this year, because I work from home like so many people, that I had like these meaningful friendships, but I really wanted to be like a part of my community again. And so I have gotten involved with a couple things locally to me, and I don't necessarily spend time with those people, but that really helps with my sense of belonging as well. But however, most of the time we are lonely, and there's different kinds of loneliness, but most of the time it's because we don't have the meaningful bonds that we want.
That's so fascinating. And I feel the truth in that, being surrounded by people and still feeling lonely, having lots of friends that you could maybe go get coffee with, but no one who you could trust with that thing about you that you feel is so weird and awkward that, you just hope people don't notice. Um, and I love the distinction you make between like community is different than friendships. And I think you're right. We do kind of confuse those two. So if someone is looking to deepen the bond,
Mhm.
what do they do?
Well, I do want to say there is a science to friendship, and we really owe this knowledge to, in my opinion, she is a friendship pioneer. Her name is Shasta Nelson. She really put a lot of this research together. And now, especially because of how lonely we freaking are, there's so many people coming out and building upon what she put together. So, what she put together was, if you can imagine like a triangle, and at the base of that triangle, there's meaningful moments. So, meaningful moments being like a moment where you feel seen, supported, understood, where you share a laugh with somebody, a lighthearted moment. Meaningful moments are like the base of all of our friendships. And so, then if you're imagining that triangle, towards the base there, let's say those are like acquaintances. And then as you move up to the top of the triangle to the point, that is where our closest relationships are. So, like, even our relationships with our partners, our relationships with, if our quote unquote like besties, those are towards the pinnacle of the triangle. And how we deepen our bonds is through, and like almost like the sides of the triangle, like, so as you go up to the point, the sides are consistency and vulnerability. Now, sometimes when people hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, gross, consistency in another area of life. But I want to offer it to be really, really fun. And what I love helping my clients do is to make it really, really fun. But consistency can be really broken down into history and frequency. Because all of the time, people tell me, I have a best friend, but I only see her like 3 times a year. So I just want more relationships like that are more fulfilling. And I'm like, great, beautiful, like easy breezy cover girl. I love that for you. However, you have that relationship because you and this bestie have been friends since kindergarten, or you were roommates in college, you spent a whole year together, or whatever it may be, right? So you have so much history and consistency of meaningful moments, vulnerability built up with this person, that it's almost like you have like a huge investment in this connection bank. So when you are able to plug into that, the connection feels more meaningful rather than, somebody you meet 3 times a year that you don't have that history with. So that's where that comes from. The other side of consistency, to kind of break it down, is also frequency. And this is why so many of us get really close to our coworkers, as we see them every day. So, but if you imagine the combination between those two, as far as consistency goes, the consistency is really just the consistent, I'm showing up, I'm here to connect with you. That is really it. Like, I love breaking it down into history and frequency for people, but that is what's really important. So, for example, like met through a mastermind, and the consistency of like going every 6 months and spending, 3 days from like basically the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, like with all of these women, that's a lot of consistency, a lot of time being invested during that day. But also like the frequency of going every 6 months, like could build really deep bonds because it was really consistent. So that's one side. I can see like the wheels turning. Do you have any comments?
No, I mean, you said there's a science to friendship, and I was like, oh my gosh, there is. And of course, there would be. So I'm really liking how you're breaking it down. Consistency is on the one side, because I just had a conversation yesterday with probably my oldest friend. She and I met in third grade.
Mhm.
And we don't have to talk very often to just kind of jump right back into really deep and meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
So keep going. I want to hear the other side.
Yeah, and the other side is vulnerability. And when people,
Gross.
yes, exactly. When people hear that, they're like, oh my gosh. And at the same time, too, what I did, because I used to think that friendship was literally just them knowing everything about you and you knowing everything about them. And I was always so confused when after like trauma dumping, which I didn't know that was a thing in the past, but like after trauma dumping and like asking all of these women on coffee dates, like about like talking to them for hours and asking them all about their deepest stuff, like why we weren't best friends after. And this is why it's because it's only one piece of the triangle. We need all three to really work. But vulnerability isn't just bearing your soul to somebody or talking about those deep things either. A way that I love to think about vulnerability that was very much inspired by the creator of this triangle is that it's two people feeling safe and seen in a satisfying way. And it's just incremental vulnerability is, oh, I see more of you and you see more of me. And so if we have like a coworker and they come over to our house, that's vulnerable because they're seeing the way we decorate. They're seeing the way, we kick our shoes off when we get there. They're seeing us outside of a work environment. So that is them seeing more of us in a safe and satisfying way, for example. So as we have that meaningful moment space at the bottom here, and then we go up through consistency and through vulnerability, that's how we move people from acquaintances to these deep, meaningful bonds that we all crave. So the quote unquote problem with that is a lot of us have thought barriers to all three of those things on some level.
Yes, I can see that. The other thing that kind of immediately jumps up for me is like, now that I am being more vulnerable, that's also when you bump into things about each other that you might not like as much, or that might rub you the wrong way or hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then what?
Then what? Yeah.
Then
So
what?
and we cannot, just like how we have with our partnerships, or even like this triangle here, um, it's used for friendship and it was created for friendship, but it works as well. Like, even if you think about dating, you do all three of those things to move somebody up your triangle when you are dating somebody as well. So this just goes for connection, point blank, period. Like even with our families and things like that. So I will say that when we come up against these moments and we have these conflicts, that is, again, like you said, it's vulnerable, but it builds so much trust. Truly, I think we need to change this narrative that we all have that friendship should just feel good all of the time, because we do have that narrative, and instead use the moments for when it doesn't feel as good or when conflict does arise to use those as moments for us rather than, oh, this is a toxic, my Midwest is coming out. This is a toxic friendship, right? Like she's not being a supportive friend, because we are so quick to go there. So an example that I have is I actually had a friend call me out last summer. Now I'm really bad. Speaking of responding to messages, it's the bane of my existence. If I could just like send a mental note to people and not have to like type it out, my thoughts, like, life would be wonderful. However, I had one of my, if you will, like best friends. I don't love that term, but uh, I had one of my best friends reach out to me and say that it, was really hurting her feelings and that she didn't feel prioritized in our friendship. And she also said as well, like, this is super vulnerable. Like, I'm really scared of like, your reaction with this. And I appreciated her honesty so much in the whole entire thing because it allowed me to say, oh my gosh, I love you and you are a priority to me. And I would never try to make you feel that way on purpose and to kind of explain where I was coming from. Because in the past, I had told her, right? Like, I hate answering messages, but I didn't explain as well, like, as being like a full-time entrepreneur and like, I don't like to mentally shift a task to responding to a message and then come back to whatever the heck it was that I was doing, is a little bit much for me at times. But I also told her as well, like, it allowed me to check in with myself, reflect on my own behaviors, and be like, okay, do I want to make sure I'm responding to at least my priority people? I do. So that was something I got to check in with. But anyway, I share this story because it brought us so much closer, and the trust in our relationship shot up because we were so vulnerable, raw, and real with each other. And she was really afraid the opposite was going to happen. Uh, but it really did bring us so much closer because we it's one thing to be like, oh, let's be honest with each other. We can have more trust by being honest. It's another thing to be like, I'm going to see the benefit of the doubt in you. I'm going to hear you out. And I'm going to sit down and have a conversation and work on this relationship with you. That is like the ultimate trust, if you will, like of like emotional safety as far as like a friendship really goes, is like, because and again, I think for a lot of us with how fickle our friendships really are, um, that a lot of us again are afraid that it won't. And she was really afraid that it would hurt our friendship and it would be the end of it rather than it deepening it so, so much.
That's really beautiful. And I've had similar experiences with friendships as of late. When I left the religious community that I was raised in, a lot of my friendships stayed there as well. And so I did have to kind of create relationships from scratch. And actually, I did this before as well, but I would invite people over and we would have dinner or play games, and then they would leave. And my husband would turn to me and he would say, okay, how'd they do? What? Because he called it having tryouts. And just seeking friendships that where you can show up 100%, say when something bothers you, that's just so rare, partly because of this programming, right? Like we're taught that our romantic relationship should get all of this work. It takes work. It's hard. You have to build skills. And we come into our romantic relationships in some way prepared for the amount of work that those require. And we don't come into friendships. And this is just speaking for myself, I just think kind of friendships just kind of blossom. And if they're meant to be, then they just are. But I know that I did not have the mindset that if a relationship matters, it's going to take work. If a relationship is important, you are eventually going to bump into each other in painful ways. And older versions of me would have just like quietly backed away, done the fade out. But I think in the last couple of years, I have friendships where I call it like taking a chance. And what I mean by that is, okay, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to tell this friend that something hurt my feelings, or that I don't know how to understand what just happened between us, rather than ignoring it, rather than just kind of hoping it goes away, because it never goes away, right? It just kind of lives in the basement in kind of this weird form of like, I'm not really sure if I can trust you. I'm not really sure if you see me. So this kind of take a chance thing that I've done lately has been completely new. And I have had the very same experience that you just named, where it's like, so it feels terrible and I feel like I'm going to die. And then my friends respond with like so much love and so much gratitude that I would trust them with that I would want the relationship to go deeper. And then last week, I read a quote in a book by author Prentice Hill, and they said that conflict is always a relationship asking to go deeper.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. It's so true. It's so true. And I would love to just to reflect, because I'm going to take a guess here, and I don't know, maybe I don't know. I think part of it is this is also helpful, like a way that I like to think about it as well, is that people will either meet me at that deeper end or they won't. But then you know, right? You know, and it's painful, but if you know that you can be okay with the pain, it's so much easier to do that. Like, okay, this person will either meet me on this deeper end or they won't. And that's what happened like at the beginning of this year with the friendship I just told you. That person wasn't willing to meet me at the deeper end. And that was truly okay for lots of different reasons. But I am also going to take a guess here and say that when you were taking those chances with friends, that you were also, I'm just going to take it again, I don't know, I wasn't there, but that you were also probably vulnerable in a different way on some level where you express in some way, it didn't have to be explicitly, that you cared about the friendship.
Yeah. Yeah.
So often people are like, oh, okay, I could just tell, like if they hear me say, we need to talk about these things, especially like I had somebody I was networking with recently say, like, oh, but if I tell them, they've had so many friendships like end. I was like, okay, well, how were you telling them? Right? We were coming at it with like blame or like just like throw in like guilt.
Okay.
That
That's the
people,
perfect, yes. Yeah. That's the
so
perfect pivot question, because how do you modify a friendship if you don't feel like it's going the way you want it to?
yeah, I do think having those kind of conversations and again offering that chance for somebody, I love the way you said it, for somebody to go deeper with you and to have, again, I call it like connective communication, to have that explicitly said or implied, and it's vulnerable. That's gonna, especially for a lot of us that are kind of avoidant, which we know that more and more of us are becoming more
Mhm.
avoidantly attached, it's gonna make you like want to gag, but let's gag and go, let's keep going. And let's throw it out there and be like, I care about this friendship of saying this because I love you and I want us to connect even deeper. Or, you know, like also coming at it from, I didn't think, you know, you said this with malice. However, this is what it meant to me in that moment. I care about you, or like, I just want us to sort this out. It is so vulnerable to do that, but that connective communication is so huge. However, at the same time, so many people will be like, okay, well, how do you know when to stop being friends with somebody or when to stop trying? And I know that was a question that you sent me as well. And I think having a few attempts to really open up, even if this is a friend you've had forever, because you would not believe how many clients I work with where they go have one of these connective conversations. And even then, they're like, they have so many stories built up, and they're like, this person, it's just not going to change. It just is what it is. And they go and they have these connective conflict conversations. And then they're like, oh my gosh, wow, I got to see a whole different side of this person. Like, why not just offer the chance, is my philosophy around it. However, let's say, you know, you've done that. Let's say as well that, you know, you don't necessarily feel good in this friendship, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think sometimes it can be harder to, if you will, like manage our minds around some people after a while. Like it's like, okay, I could be friends with this person, but then I'd have to constantly manage my mental stories around them. What I just want to say is sometimes we can just prioritize other people. We don't realize this, but we have friendship habits, right? So with the, if we go back to the triangle analogy, if we have a friend that we're like, okay, I definitely like, I love this person. I don't necessarily want to stop being their friend, but this friendship isn't as fulfilling to me anymore. I've had conversations with them about it. I've even told them, right, that I'm not feeling as fulfilled, whatever it may be. I'm going to prioritize other people. We have to mentally change our habits around that, because what's a habit is the next time like something funny comes up or something emotional comes up and you have a habit of going to this friend you don't want to be friends with anymore, you're going to want to do that. So one, we have to change our habits, but two, I think also just recognizing in general, that's the beauty and the fluidity of friendship, is that we have the ability to prioritize other people and then just move somebody down our triangle. They don't have to be at the top anymore. We can move other people up. So I think that's helpful to think and to realize. And it happens honestly anyways, like our friendships and our triangles moving around. We have different triangles, if you will, like completely different friendship triangles and placements of our friends every 7 years anyway, right? So I think that's helpful to think of. However, um, everybody just really needs to trust themselves and their judgment when it comes to, okay, this is not somebody I just want to be around anymore. Like I need to end this friendship, you know what I mean? And have that kind of like breakup conversation and cut it off. I'm really big on conversations. I don't think it's very kind to do the slow fade, if you will,
Yeah.
but mhm.
Yeah. The slow fade or the quick fade or just
Yeah.
the ghosting. There's lots of ways that I think we try to save ourselves having to be vulnerable or just having to be honest.
Mhm.
So if someone is going to end a friendship, what do you advise them to do?
I think, and it's again another one of those uncomfortable conversations, but I really think for me personally, if I were to end a friendship, and a lot of my clients as well, it's this chapter in my life. I want it to be done, but I don't want to hate this person. That's normally what people have said to me. That's normally how I have felt in the past, right? I don't want to have disdain for this person. So ahead of time, I like to think about, okay, what do I appreciate about our time that we had together? Right? What do I appreciate about like the moments that we shared in the chapters that they were really involved in my life? And where am I going? Right? And how can I have so much compassion for this person? And then from there, going and having the conversation. And these ones are really uncomfortable to have, but to say, like, look, like I appreciate our time together. You know what I mean? Just really making it about, I'm moving in this direction. This is where I'm going. This is what I need out of a friendship. This is where I need out of support or whatever it may be. And so it's time for me to move on. And I respect you and appreciate our time together. And so I wanted to let you know or to like have that kind of conversation. There's no right or wrong way to go about it, truly. But I do think we often just black and white thinking, okay, we need to think this person was bad, this friendship was bad. And I think allowing space for it to also be like, no, this chapter of my life was really beautiful. And I have so much compassion for this person or appreciation for this person and the role that they played at the time, you know?
Yeah, it almost seems like allowing for relationships to run their course.
Hmm.
We fully allow that in romantic relationships. People break up, people get divorced. And so I like the idea of having like options. Like number one, I can move them down the pyramid, right? I don't have to have such a large amount of contact with them, or I can limit my contact around certain things where we get along for the most part. I think the only thing that I would add to that is just know and like your reasons for doing that.
Hmm.
Like, because I can imagine myself just kind of moving them down the pyramid because I was afraid to maybe have a more honest conversation. So
So
just
true.
know that and name that. And if you don't want to have the honest conversation, you also don't have to, but just know that that's what you're doing. And then if I do feel like, this relationship is to the point where I just need to make it's going to be a dramatic change. And I want to let the other person know that I can do that with love, and that my only job is to show up the way I want to, and understand that they're going to have their feelings about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the work around, okay, I don't need to people please this person. I don't need to make this person feel a certain type of way, right? I also don't need to
Yeah.
get it quote unquote right. Like you said, I just need to stand by my reasons and show up how I want to. I think that is so well said, because I think that is honestly the biggest piece of the actions that I just said, is how you do it.
Yeah. And why you're doing it. As we wrap up here, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you said? I would also love for you to tell people how they can find you if they want to know more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to say, because we talked a lot about like barriers here, but I also want to say as well that friendship, right, is built, meaningful bonds are built, but connection can happen in an instant. And so that's truly what I help my people do. I just launched a podcast called the Socially Delightful Podcast. And that title came from, for years now, I've been helping people really become socially delighted, feeling filled up by connection, whether that be with their communities or their meaningful friendships, really enjoying being themselves. And that kind of mentality, that kind of connective joy, it's it's one of the most beautiful, fulfilling things. And we know too that it helps us heal faster from trauma. Like, it helps our nervous systems heal faster. Our bodies respond to stress like so differently when we're feeling connected. It's so huge. So I just want to offer that thought, like, friendship is built, but like connection can happen in an instant. And then people can find me like basically anywhere, at connection with Jewel, like a gem or like a rock. But yeah, connection with jewel.com. Oh, and my assistant Sam just put together our, like, I did these trainings for the largest women's conference in my state, which is so fun and so cool. And we love them so much that we decided to turn them into like little freebies. So everyone can access those trainings of what they're called How to At Any Event. And it has a video and a worksheet. And the next one is How to Turn People. So it talks a little bit more about the triangle and kind of goes into and guides them into how they can do that in that training. So it's super good.
Well, we'll make sure we have the links to those in the show notes as well. Jewel, it's been delightful. So it's been delightful, socially and otherwise delightful, to have this conversation with you. I so appreciate the time and the care that you have put into this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so fun. You really asked such beautiful questions I don't normally get to answer. I know I told you that at the beginning. I was so excited about it. So thank you for having me to talk about my favorite thing in the whole world, and for your thoughtfulness in doing that.